He's spent over 30 years in the clinic and on the field, supporting both pro athletes and weekend warriors. Now, sports physiotherapist and Coreshorts creator Greg Bay is taking you inside the locker room with the show Injuries, Innovations, and Insights.
Greetings, everybody, and welcome to episode 9 of Injuries, Innovations, and Insights. I'm your host, Greg Bay, sports physio, and today we're going to take a really good look at a new way on how to prevent concussion by training the neck. Today, we've got Dr. Theo Versteegh with us. He graduated with his physiotherapy degree from the University of Western Ontario back in 1998. And he's also received his diploma in advanced manual and manipulative therapy in 2002 and is currently still a member of IFOMPT. One of the cool things is Theo's played for the Western Mustangs football team from 1994 to 1997, and he's maintained his passion for sport and rehabilitation throughout his career. What a career he's had and still has. He's worked at the Allan McGavin Clinic in Vancouver. He's worked at the Fowler Kennedy Sports Med Clinic in London, Ontario. Wow, he's nailed both of the top ones. And he's also worked internationally in the Middle East. I guess this football guy has been around. He's also completed his master's in science at Western University. And during his tenure at the Fowler Kennedy Sports Medicine Clinic from 2008 to 2017, he was one of 2 sport concussion experts on staff. He's had an interest in traumatic brain injury, and that led him to looking at the effects of the dynamic neuromuscular leg strengthening. 2016, he completed his PhD at Western with a research focus on the role of neck muscles in preventing concussion. So today we have an amazing guest, Dr. Theo Versteegh, who's also published many articles and continues to teach in the physiotherapy programs, as well as other sports medicine specialists on the advanced concussion management and treatments. Theo, Dr. Versteegh, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Greg. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm glad we could finally connect again. I'm looking forward to this. This is going to be fun.
Yes, well, it's really exciting for me to have you on board because here we are and we go back 20 years, you know, just after you graduated when you were out here and I got to know you and we'd sit down over a beer and all of a sudden we'd just be talking about what possibilities are. We'd banter up research, we'd banter up ideas, and finally people would have to say, would you two leave it alone and get over here? You know, and here we are 20 years later circling back, and you've got such an amazing device. It's not a product. It's really something that I'm excited in, and I get it. And I'm so glad that you could be here to share it with us today.
Thanks, Greg. Yeah, and likewise. I mean, it is amazing how things kind of come full circle. Because you're right. Like now more than 20 years ago was when we'd be doing that, and it was your at the time girlfriend and now wife would be the one telling us to kind of knock it off and kind of join the social circle, right?
Yeah, well, that's terrific. So Topspin 360, I've seen it. It's amazing. Tell us a little bit about it, but tell us how it all got started.
Sure. So the way Topspin started is how most kind of great ideas start in Canada, which is in the pub after playing rec hockey. And it was back 2011 when Sidney Crosby he ended up suffering a concussion. I think it was the Winter Classic where he suffered the first one. And then about 6 days later, they said he only had a kind of a neck injury, but he actually ended up getting really a heavy shoulder to the head. And back then, even I would say that they were still probably a bit too quick to get people back playing. And with that neck injury, he ended up suffering a second concussion in, again, the game like 6 days later or something like that. And that kept him out for almost a year. And it was that second concussion that we were sitting around, having some beers and watching it. And, as you know, kind of what you can't, as physios, you can't watch an injury on TV without, diagnosing and kind of going through and determining, well, X, Y, and Z, right? And especially physios with a couple of beers and after hockey, like you just solve all the world's problems, right? So same thing happened. Looking at how it happened, I'm like, wow, like his neck, like it was as if his head wasn't even attached. Like talk about a bobblehead. And so that got me thinking about back when I played football, and we had it was a bit archaic at the time, but it was the four-way neck machine. And so, fair enough, that will strengthen your neck. But it got me thinking, again, from the physio side of things, and knowing that muscles don't just contract by pushing against a heavy weight and controlling it back down. Like you need to improve the muscle very specifically to the forces that they're going to be exposed to. So that got me thinking, okay, a concussive event is going to be a very fast impulse load that you're going to have to load up those muscles in an eccentric capacity. So get them to absorb a load, not generate a load. So it's not like here comes, a hit. I've got to kind of line up and push into it. You've got to quickly absorb and reflexively kick in to stabilize that head. And so it got me thinking again with the four-way neck, like, yeah, that'll improve your neck strength, but that'll specifically improve your ability to take a heavy weight and push against it. And so if that's all you're doing, then your neck's only going to know how to take a heavy weight and push against it. And it won't improve its ability to dynamically stabilize the head against a sudden blow that can lead to concussion. So that's kind of the, the impetus of the seed that was planted. And it got me thinking, okay, so how do you dynamically strengthen the neck, and including like true multiplanar strengthening? Because even the four-way neck, that's only four ways, literally forward, back, right, and left side. Never mind any kind of off-tangent hit or rotation. And as we know, like the neck moves the head in three planes of movement. So it's a lot like the shoulder in that way, and that it's not a hinge joint. It goes in all planes of movement, side flexion, rotation, and every combination thereof. So how do you strengthen something in a true multidimensional fashion and in a way eccentrically to absorb a load and focus on just the fastest twitch muscle fibers, which are the ones that you want to get to kick in, and not the slower, heavy weight, push against it, heavy weight, push against it. Mm-hmm. So it literally took me probably about 4 months of kind of tinkering, playing around with a few different approaches, and then it was actually while I was working on an approach, looking at essentially using kind of a small eccentric weight system, but I happened to have it attached to a turret, and it kind of started spinning, and then it kind of got me thinking, like, oh my god, this is exactly what I'm looking for. Like it's safety in that you can only get it spinning as quickly as you're capable of getting it spinning, similar to a hula hoop. And I'm like, the fast and the dynamic motion and everything, it's covering every kind of plane of movement that the neck can go through. And it was probably that kind of eureka moment where it's just like, this is exactly what I've been looking for. And that and that was the start of it.
Well, it's so interesting in that you almost fell into it. Not that you didn't have an interest in biomechanics and neurology and joint neurology, but there was an episode there on TV. Being a football player, you've probably had some history of concussion yourself. It's just a guess, but you'd look at it. You have this wonderment about what are we doing and how do we affect it. Everybody's talking about you need a new helmet. We need deflection instead of absorption. We need materials. We need this and that. But then what other things can you impact, and what things can you change, and what are we currently completely lacking? So how did you got an idea? Everybody gets ideas, right? Yeah. Everybody gets ideas, especially in the pub. What was your impetus to follow through on that?
It was, probably with a lot of ideas, it was just kind of one of those ones that just ended up sticking in that, you can probably appreciate this where kind of when you talk about it at the time, like, oh yeah, that sounds interesting. And that's like, no, you're not getting it. Like, this is like, come on, wrap your head around this for a minute. And when it's one of those situations where you talk about it enough and kind of no one else is picking up the mantle, and you're like, okay, this has got to get out there. And so, I had just finished my master's of science at Western, so I familiar with research, and so I was like, listen, all I got to do is go find. I'm sure there's tons of research out there on the role of the neck and decreasing concussion. Again, focus on the physiology that you've got to train the neck to absorb a sudden blow, not just push against a static weight. Like it seems commonsensical, right? And so I went and started in the literature, and at the time, there was very little in the literature linking neck strength with concussion. And so knowing what would be necessary just to test out the fundamentals of this theory that I had, I knew it was a significant undertaking. And so that's where I thought, you know what? Okay, given that the research, the state of the literature right now doesn't support this. I mean, it doesn't refute it, but it doesn't support it because there's just nothing. There's nothing out there, right? Yeah. And so, realizing the steps needed to just even take those first steps of testing does this theory hold water, was a significant undertaking. I thought, well, I could be wrong in one of my assumptions. Like there's, very easily I could have missed X, Y, or Z in the, there's tons of potential holes in the theory. So I thought, I don't want to release a gimmick on the market. I want to make sure that there is proper science that this does have an effect. If it doesn't, I don't want to do it. And when I realized what was going to be necessary, I thought, well, I might as well turn it into a PhD. That way, if I've made an error in my assumptions along the line, then at the end of the day, I'll have a PhD for it, and I can teach others how to not make the same mistakes.
And now we can try and teach others on how to make the same replications of a process that can allow them to work through things, because so many of us spend a heck of a lot of money in the early stages, and then we have a real cool toy, but it doesn't necessarily back up or have any evidence that demonstrates that it carries the same type of scientific value, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I get it. As soon as you started to talk about it, I get it. In the clinic, we see so many people that use muscles in a way that they're not intended to use. Right. Chronic pain starts to bring in primary movers as stabilizers. Yeah. And next thing you know, stabilizers completely get weak. Oh, gee, what are we talking about? The neck. So yeah, you take a look at the shear forces that people are putting through their neck when they stick that weight on their head and dangle it down. And you go, how wrong is that? Yeah. It is so far away from how it works. And, if you've got any type of loose disc in there, or you're loose jointed, you're just, you're going to shear the daylights out of it. So you take a look at your thought in the sense of also knowing the biomechanic, not only of the mid-cervical spine at sort of a 45-degree angle of complex combined movements, but then you got the upper cervical special area that has got a certain degree of almost pure rotation attached to it until it connects into the combined movements. So then you look at your device, it's pretty cool. So explain more a little bit about it, because a lot of the listeners, we might not get it yet. So explain what it is, and then maybe what you can do for us is then talk about some of the things you had to go through to build the thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So, well, I mean, I do have it here, so the kind of viewers that are watching it can at least appreciate how it looks, because to some extent it's a bit challenging to describe. But what it is, it's a modified football helmet with a centrally mounted axis and like a weighted, essentially like a hammer at the end of it that is freely spinning, and you pop the helmet on, and then much like a hula hoop, you use coordinated movements to get the weight spinning. And then the faster you get the weight spinning, the more centripetal force is generated, and the stronger the neck needs to be to keep it spinning. The faster the neck muscles must constantly respond and react to stabilize the head underneath the load and to fight to increase the momentum. Because as soon as you lose coordination or fatigue out, much like a hula hoop, the weight just stops spinning. The resistance is taken away instantly. So the nice thing about that on the safety profile is that people will never be able to get this thing spinning faster than they are capable of getting it spinning. And they will always be limited by whatever the weakest link is. So if they genuinely have weak neck musculature, yeah, you won't be able to do it. But there's a lot of people who have really strong neck musculature, but they don't have the neuromuscular control, the proprioception, the balance, all those different, the coordination, all those factors play in to get it spinning.
Yeah, so even that's right. So even if they're off by a small amount, that will completely change the rhythm of the centrifugal force, which will then, of course, be represented in the ability to have dysfunction.
Yeah, and I'm going to pause for one moment there, because this is now this is getting really nerdy, admittedly. All right, but it uses centripetal force, not centrifugal or centrifugal force.
Okay.
And the reason being is that I'll pronounce it centrifugal so people can hear the difference. Centrifugal force involves gravity, and you can think about that as a at the fairway they've got the swings, like the swings where you spin in and then it's it spins you up and the swings swing out and then it slows down and then comes back down. That's centrifugal force. Centripetal force is purely a resistance coming back to the center axis, and it doesn't involve gravity. So, you can think about the difference that centrifugal force you could not do on the space station, whereas you could use this on the space station. It is gravity independent. It is purely the momentum of spinning the weight, constantly pulling away, that causes the force and the resistance.
Right. Okay. So then that's the key is part of it is the weight is constantly trying to move away from you. And therefore, you've got to be able to concentrically initiate it and eccentrically at the same time control it.
So exactly. So as the weight is spinning, it's going to cause an eccentric pull here. And in order to accelerate it, you've got to facilitate the stretch shorten cycle. So a quick eccentric burst into concentric to get it to give the momentum to get it to spin around. And if any of those 360 degrees, if you don't fight it, if you don't feed into that stretch strength, then it automatically slows down and in essence can stop instantly.
Yes, the orbit completely changes because the axis is off.
That's right.
Wow, we should we're talking planets now, right? But it's true, right?
Yeah.
And then the other part of it is that I think that we get lost in the word strength. By definition, we're not talking strength. We always talk inhibition. We talk about activation now. We talk about neurological, that whole joint proprioception feedback loop. So tell us a little bit about the nuts and bolts, and let's get rid of strength and tell us what's going on at the physiological level.
So it's the neuromuscular control. And that's neuromuscular control and with that proprioception. So it's not how strong the neck is, it's how quickly those muscles can kick in to stabilize and prevent that head from moving, whether it's whipping back or to the side, wherever it is, it's preventing that massive amount of acceleration. Or in some cases, like with the athlete who gets knocked on their back and their head flies back into the turf, it's to stop that head from swinging back into the turf. And on the initial hit, it's also in essence, like the strength and the neuromuscular control and the quick stabilization from a physics perspective, you're connecting an 8-pound mass. If you can quickly kick those muscles in, you're now making it a 208-pound mass. And so when you look at force equals mass times acceleration, if the mass is only 8 pounds, then that force is going to cause a huge acceleration. Whereas if that same force is applied to a 208-pound mass, then the equivalent acceleration is much lower.
And you hit the nail on the head. Like for me, I've been concussed a few times with hockey. I got knocked right out, get hit in the head with a puck. And I woke up and played the rest of the game. But there was another time I got cross-checked in front of the net. And this, maybe it's an accumulative effect. But when I got cross-checked, I was toast. I was wobble legs. I was throwing up. I was done. Like, I was seeing complete sideways. And, when I got punched in the head and you get knocked out, it's like, okay. But my worst symptoms were from the fact that I ended up with a contre-coup type of whiplash that I wasn't expecting. And it was really initiated by the body moving under the head.
Yeah. And that's like, there's a fair bit of research that, there's so much overlap between the symptom profiles of someone with whiplash and someone with concussion that at times they can be almost indiscernible. And that's because when you think about from the neuroanatomy, so many of the concussion symptoms are cranial nerve symptoms. So they're dysfunction of the cranial nerves. And it's also, when you think about the brain, like, the frontal cortex, like, all this is fairly well kind of secured and it's fairly smooth. But when you get the underside, there's so many curves and nooks and crannies and all this, where when tissues bend and curve around there, they're so much more sensitive to acceleration, because then if one portion of that is accelerating more than the other, that's where you get the tearing. Whereas when it's more kind of continuous, you don't have such dramatic shear forces that are involved. And so that's why, like, from my experience, definitely, and research would reinforce this, that if someone complains of neck pain after concussion, that they are at higher risk of prolonged recovery from concussion. And I mean, it makes sense, right? And there's also evidence that preseason complaints of neck pain will increase your likelihood of suffering a concussion that following season. And in your case, if you've had a prior concussion, you're between 3 and 6 times more likely to suffer future concussions. And I would argue one of the reasons why with that increased risk is that, Greg, as physios, I've always, being a manual therapy, dyed-in-the-wool manual therapist, like true blue. And I always felt very confident and competent treating the neck. However, I could get in there, feel the joints and figure out which one wasn't moving and, snap and crack, or, work on soft tissue, whatever, get the neck moving beautifully pain-free. But that's generally where it would end. Like, we as physios would not strengthen it beyond active range of motion. Maybe you'd give them deep neck flexors, which is endurance, but it's one component or facet of neck strength and neuromuscular control. But it's not dynamic neck strengthening. Like, the analogy I would use is, think about an ankle. As a physiotherapist, we are really good at treating ankle sprains. You come in, an acute ankle, like the first thing, you're not going to throw them on a wobble board and do dynamic strengthening, but you're going to do some techniques that get the swelling down, get some compression on there, maybe some modality, some controlled, protected weight bearing, and then you're going to progress to make sure they get full functional active range of motion and pain-free with walking. Now, imagine as an upper level physio, if you rehab that person to that point, where they're now able to walk pain-free and they've got full active range of motion, and you say, yep, you're good. Discharge. You're going to be seeing them within the next 3 to 6 months, because they're going to trip on a crack in the sidewalk and re-injure that tissue. Those tissues need to be dynamically loaded. After the inflammatory phase and the proliferation, all the tissues there, the tissues need force to be put through them, dynamic loading, so that those tissues can normalize. If you don't do that, it's just muddled up scar tissue that has no integrity. And as soon as you trip on the sidewalk or whatever, you're back to square one, repeatedly back to square one. And that's why, we've all treated them as physios where people have chronic ankles. And it's like, yeah, because they always leave. They're like, you know what, feels great. Thanks, chief. Okay. But you're like, literally, now's the hard part. Now's the rehab part. And they take off. It's like, well, that's exactly why it's a revolving door with you. And yet with the neck, as physios, we're the ones that are discharging them once they're pain-free and active full range of motion. Like, what musculoskeletal condition do you discharge when they have pain-free active range of motion? Nope, you're done. We're not going to dynamically load those tissues. Why is the neck treated any differently?
Well, it's exactly right. And, and with that said, there's a few therapists and sports chiropractors that have done really well on that next level and of returning some of the athletes now. But the point is that shouldn't be any different than how we approach an ankle. The value of what you're doing isn't the early stages, because I think it could be really done by really a textbook type of approach. But when you look at the most important part of the recovery, we're not getting it. We're either not selling it good enough to the customer that says, now we're at the most important part of your recovery, or for some reason we're gatekeeping that next level of care. And with that said, if we reverse engineer it into prevention, now we get to talk about Topspin 360. So we identify the fact that what is a lot of the weakness in recovery and returning people to activity, and then to back it all up, that is a really good indication of what we need to do before it happens. So we need to get in front of it, not behind it, but even we're bad or poor at getting behind it once it's occurred, right? Mm-hmm. So that is a great way to look at the fact that what you're doing with Topspin is you're really getting in front of something to create a faster, more timely, more multi-direction, and really, honestly, what appears to be a pretty simple approach to it.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, the cool thing is, like, with the key metric that the Topspin provides is the rate of force development. So, like, to get into a bit of the weeds again, the Topspin uses, as I mentioned, centripetal force. Centripetal force is mass times velocity squared over the radius of the weight. And so what that means is, as the velocity increases, as the revolutions per minute, as that speed increases, the centripetal force goes up exponentially to the factor of 2. Now, certainly in the strength and conditioning world, and you'll appreciate, is the big metric that everyone's focused on is this rate of force development. Because it's not the amount of force, it's how quickly can you generate that force. Mm-hmm. And that's the same thing. Like, I mean, you've got people who can squat a house, but I'll race them in a 40-yard dash any day, right? Like, they can generate so much more force than me, but it takes them so much longer to do so. And the key thing when you look at a real top athlete, it's that rate of force development that's impressive, not the absolute force. Mm-hmm. So with the Topspin, you've got centripetal force, but now you also have the time per revolution, which is the inverse of the RPM. And as that speed goes up, the time per revolution goes down. What that means is that's another exponential value. So as the speed of the RPM goes up, the rate of force development goes up exponentially to the factor of 3. Such that someone who's able to spin at 150 RPM is roughly around 4 pounds of force per second. Someone who's able to spin at 300 RPM, so double the RPM, is equivalent to over 33 pounds of force per second. It's a dramatic increase as you get up in speed. And that athlete who's able to get over 300 RPM on the Topspin, that is equivalent to more than 5 revolutions per second, meaning that every muscle of the neck is going through 5 full contract and relax cycles within 1 second, less than 200 milliseconds that contract and relax cycle is happening. Like, when we're talking about how do you strengthen the neck to help absorb a potentially concussive blow, those are the speeds and velocities that, to have any lick of a chance, you need to be approaching those types of velocities. Not 3 seconds to push, 3 seconds to lower back down.
And I guess what's interesting about that is that's very hard to train without having something that can mimic that type of force, load, direction, and speed. So your Topspin 360 isn't just something you can do on your own, because you can't reproduce that math. So what 360 does is it does all that based on what the mathematical requirements are to match what the mathematical deficit is that causes the problem.
That's right. And so whether that deficit is coming from a lack of coordination or a lack of balance or a lack of proprioception or a lack of strength or a lack of neuromuscular control, whatever it is, that will be limiting you on the Topspin 360. And this is where the really exciting thing for us comes in, because hopping on the Topspin, your peak RFD, rate of force development, that's a quantifiable metric, and it's reproducible. We know what that is, right? And so if you've got someone who can get 33 pounds of force on the Topspin versus someone who's only at 3 pounds of force, I can guarantee you that person at 3 pounds of force is at much higher risk of concussion than the one who's at 33 pounds of force. And the cool thing is, now I'm working on writing this up, but this is exactly what we saw with the women's soccer team at Western. So after they trained on the Topspin for the 2019 season, back in January 2020, just before COVID, we were going to run the study again, where we're going to train the Western women's soccer team on the Topspin 360. And we collected their baseline data and performance on the Topspin. And we also asked the history of concussion. So as I mentioned, that is the one thing that researchers can hang their hat on for prediction for future concussion. Those with a history of concussion are known to be at 3 to 6 times higher risk of future concussion. So we wanted to know, okay, those who are at higher risk of concussion, what's their rate of force development compared to those who are at relatively lower risk of concussion? Those with a history of concussion scored 3.85 pounds of force per second. Those with no history of concussion scored 7.14. And, all the researchers love their p-values. It was less than 0.01. And as a receiver operating characteristic curve, if you have a 4.5 pounds of force per second cutoff value, there's 8 players with a history of concussion. Sorry, there's 10 players with a history of concussion on that team. 8 of them scored below 4.5 pounds of force per second. There's 18 with no history of concussion. Only 4 scored below 4.5 pounds of force per second. So what that means is, as a cutoff value already, 4.5 pounds of force has an 80% sensitivity and 72% specificity for determining those who are at higher risk of concussion from those who are at lower risk. And if you bump it up to 7 pounds of force, that gives you 90% sensitivity and still 50% specificity. So
here's the story. The math doesn't lie.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you try and interpret the math a little bit differently, the math is still there. So the science that you've got based on the numbers is something that people need to look at as not only a tool, but it's a necessary component. Because I can tell you that I've never thought, I had no experience, but working in soccer for 40 years, I've never thought that the heading of a ball was a direct load that was going to produce a concussion. Most of the concussions that I've seen have been direct trauma head to head, but have also been this whiplash scenario. And then the second part is when they hit the ground.
Yep, that's right.
So you take a look at that and look at the statistics you just shared with us. Then you go, okay, well, it's not just about that specific target audience. It really has relevance and carryover to basically all types of concussions, in particular, in sort of any realm. I would even think that if you looked at it from a car accident point of view, that the people that had a higher value probably had a better chance at reacting quicker potentially.
Yeah,
I don't know. I'm taking it another level, but concussions
yeah.
are concussions, right?
Yeah, but it's interesting because we are now with the Department of Defense, we've rolled it out to 20 of the physiotherapy clinics, like nationally. Pretty much all the physiotherapy clinics in the Department of Defense are now being outfitted with Topspin 360, and they're using it for rehab of neck. There, some preventative things, but predominantly as a rehab tool post neck injury and concussion as well. But it's really interesting because, again, when you look at us as physios, on the rehab side of it, whether it's whiplash or concussion or neck strain, period, we're terrible at treating the neck. And like, I'm saying this from a statistical standpoint, from a research perspective, we are terrible at treating the neck because most cases, they will, you may get them better, but most cases of neck pain will recur. Once someone's had, a neck injury, they're going to have a recurrence of neck pain.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is that I sort of feel I do a pretty good job. And then when I'm in trouble, I phone Carol Kennedy. And unfortunately, Carol Kennedy has made an amazing career. And it's because she gets it. She teaches it, which is awesome. And but it's still a huge missing link amongst all practitioners to look at that. And of course, then you can get into a medical legal scenario behind it all. But it's still something we do poorly that we need to do better. And if we've got tools that actually statistically produce better outcomes, then we really need to be looking at the value of those tools and how that allows us to move clients in particular into what we don't do well, which is the end stage of some of that recovery.
Yeah, definitely with the neck. We do not do, and even like Carol Kennedy's, I love her stuff, but it's still all based on static stabilization and slow controlled movements against gravity. And sometimes you can bring in some TheraBand, but it's still not dynamic loading. It's still static strengthening and static positioning. And there's a study that looked at using just traditional neck strengthening, so using kind of the TheraBand. Right. And then they looked at, one group did the TheraBand, and then one group did the TheraBand and then proprioceptive exercises. This healthy cohort that did the TheraBand exercise only had a worsening of their proprioception. So they measured with joint position there. That's the one, the laser on the laser pointer doing that. They had a worsening of their joint position error by 30% when they did traditional neck strengthening with no proprioception. So that begs a question that if you've got someone from a rehab perspective, like they suffer from whiplash, and you're on top of the ball, hey, I'm going to do some neck strengthening with this cohort. That's great if neck strength is their deficit. But if proprioception is their deficit, then you're actually, borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, and you're worsening the proprioception to improve their neck strength. So it's like you're not getting them better. You need to improve all those domains in order to have a hope of rehabilitating to the point where they don't need you anymore. Now, I mean, sure, if you want them to come back every 3 to 6 months, don't bring in any dynamic strengthening.
Right. And the key about what you've created, when I got to have a good look at it, the penny dropped. It was an aha moment. It was like, aha, yeah. We talk about perturbing shoulders and, we talk about, there's so many things, but now we've got something. And you take a look at it. How's the production going? How's the business of Topspin 360 going?
So we're naturally COVID-19 threw a bit of a wrench in the situation because now no one's worried about concussions. They're all worried about COVID. But realistically, we anticipate we will get out of the fog of COVID and hopefully return to some, if not normalcy, at least some level of competition in sport again. Certainly just for mental well-being, if for nothing else. But, the anticipation is that when that happens, there's going to be significant uptick in concussions because there's been no conditioning leading up to it. So it's COVID has been a bit challenging, but we do have, as I mentioned, the Department of Defense. We've got a program with them. We're rolling out to the physio clinics across the Department of Defense, and we also have another project with Dr. Brian Benson in Calgary, where we're looking at doing a large randomized controlled trial with 400 athletes. 200 are going to get randomized to get various training. Specifically, Topspin 360 is the dynamic neck strengthening component. Compare that to a control group, and then we're going to follow them and not only look at concussion, incidents of concussion, but also incidents of lower extremity injury, because that's another really interesting factor that is gaining recognition, that if someone has a history of concussion, yes, they're 3 to 6 times more likely to suffer a future concussion, but they are up to 12 times as more likely to suffer a lower extremity injury after a concussion. And, on first blush, this is like, huh? That's not connected. Like, what? That's, you can't get any further apart than the head and the legs, right? Come on.
Right.
How is that connected? But when you look at the anatomy and the physiology, again, the penny drops, because 9 times out of 10, if you've got a concussion, you've got some form of strain or sprain of the neck. And specifically, the upper 3 vertebrae, as we know, have the highest percentage of proprioceptive fibers in the entire body. That's not a random fluke. There's a reason. And that's because our visual system and our inner ear vestibular system are attached to our head. Those are 2 out of 3 components of our balance system, where we are in relationship to gravity in the ground. And the next system is our body proprioception. And the message goes from the brainstem, travels through the neck. And if that's off even half a degree, then when you go to plant your leg there, your visually and inner ear thinks that it's here, but it's off by half a degree. Boom, all of a sudden you've rolled over your ankle or you've blown out your ACL. So from a rehab perspective, that's why it's so important to do that dynamic neuromuscular training and retraining of the proprioceptive fibers in that whole kinetic chain. Because if you're just getting them to where they're pain-free and active range of motion, if they've sprained any of those ligaments of those cervical and you don't retrain the muscles around it to provide better proprioceptive input, it's the same thing with the ankle. If you've torn your ATFL and all of a sudden you don't strengthen all the muscles and improve the proprioception around that, you are going to be more prone to spraining your ankle. And it's the same thing up here, but it affects the entire body if you don't rehab this properly.
Yeah. Well, there's no question in that, it still comes back to what we do with other joints is what we often don't do with the neck. And then now with the tools and also the information that we look at, the statistics and the math behind speed, direction, load, and then the ability for us to generate that eccentric neuromuscular control as well. So those are all terms we all go through all the time, but certainly the creation of and the work that went behind 360 is really enlightening us to really look at what we have and then look further into our own careers and applications. When we look at best practice, it should just be part of what that equals. And we're not there yet, but through your work and through your innovation, I think that it certainly brings things to light, and certainly having you on the program makes such a big difference to be able to share that. With that part of it, we also look at the innovation and the creation. And tell us a little bit about February 2nd, 2019. It was a pretty cool special day that a really neat check was handed to you. What was that all about?
That's right. So back then, so the NFL has it's called their First and Future Award, and it's a competition they've had, I think, 6 years or maybe 7 years now. And so back in 2019, one of the streams of the First and Future Award was innovations to advance athlete health and safety. And so we applied along with 1,100 other kind of companies and individuals applied for the First and Future Award. And we were hoping to just be top 5, because the top 5 get flown down to Atlanta during the week leading up to the Super Bowl. And so we were fortunate enough to get top 5. Got flown down to Atlanta the Wednesday or Tuesday before the Super Bowl on that Sunday. and we got like 3 days of pitch training. And then we, on the Saturday before the football on the NFL Network, we did our pitch along with four other companies for the innovation to advance athlete health and safety, and with a panel of judges, including like some pretty heavy hitters on the panel. We ended up winning. So we got 2 tickets to the Super Bowl and $50,000. So I don't know if you remember 2019, but it was a bit of a snooze fest for a Super Bowl, but beggars can't be choosers. At least I can tick that off my list that I've been to a Super Bowl.
Yeah, and the guest of the NFL to boot. And, you got that beautiful picture receiving the $50,000 check and prize. And, people go, oh my gosh, but that's just a drop in the teacup with the whole business aspect and the financial R&D and the whole production and sales. And it's not for the faint-hearted to be a startup, right. Is it?
That's right. And like the way things are going, like as I mentioned, this started back in 2011. So I'm in this 10 years and we're still, struggling to gain that traction. And arguably one of the reasons is on first blush, like the device looks absolutely absurd. Yeah. It's like, you got to be kidding me. Put that funny looking helmet on with the weight and what? Like anytime people see someone just for the first time, like they're just laughing like, you got to be kidding me. Right. And it's like, yeah, it looks absolutely ridiculous. Let's talk about the science, and if they've, to be blunt, if they've got the mental bandwidth to get to that level of understanding, the penny drops and they're like, oh my God, this is incredible. Yeah, I know. That's what I'm trying to tell you, right?
Yeah.
But it's those people who have just a little bit of knowledge on concussion who are like, that's ridiculous. No, that's not how concussions happen. Yeah, well, actually, it is. And it's like this is how you would strengthen that to, you won't be able to prevent all concussions, but to mitigate a whole bunch of them, yep, this is looking like the way to do it. And the nice thing is, as mentioned, like, it gives you a value. Like we anticipate with more research, we'll be able to quantify someone's concussion risk before they even step on the field, regardless of if they've had a prior concussion or not. And we'll be able to say, hey, this person here is at really high risk of concussion. You may want to think twice about playing this sport or train yourself to a safer profile, right?
Right.
Versus someone who's like over 30, like, listen, we can't claim that you're concussion proof, but you're not going to be swayed by an errant ball that happens to knock you in the noggin.
Yeah. And the other thing about your technology is it's measurable, right? So so there's data collection with it. How does that work?
So we've got an app, and it was one of our partners with OES here in London. They developed our like hardware software interface. So we've got the Topspin 360 smartphone app, and it's great. Like you plug in, you can select the number of sets, number of revolutions, and we've got the training programs that go with it, as well as a rehab program if this is post neck injury. So if you're dealing with an irritable neck or non-irritable neck, and every training session is time and date stamped and stored in the phone. So you can, from a rehab perspective, if you've got, like someone that you kind of give this to, and you could loan them out a helmet for a few weeks, do you have them come back? They can't cheat on it because you'll have exactly when they trained on it, how many sessions they did, and how well they did. And so you can actually track their progress over time and show them, like, point blank, this is your improvement. And it's also like, with tracking their improvement, they feel better, right? Like, it's just like, yeah, like it just, I don't have that hesitant feeling where I'm in a car and I'm like, oh, I hope I don't have to stop really quickly, or, oh, please don't hit me. Like it's that, and we've all had it, right? Like we've been treating the ones where we get them full pain-free and everything. They're like, yeah, it feels better, but I'm just so afraid of getting in another car accident. And it's like, yeah, because intuitively they know they don't have the dynamic stability to protect their head again. No. And this gives them that confidence.
Yeah, like how do you? I gotta say that how do you take someone and whack them on the head after and say, "How was that?" What we do with an ankle is we say, "Okay, run, cut, twist, turn." You need so many practice hours before you can be match ready. And with the neck, it's like, you're not in any pain. You got good range. Okay. go for it, you know? So,
Yeah.
maybe we need to include a big neck wrestling match beforehand, and but that's the value also of your technology is you got support, you've got information on recovery, on rehab. So you're not just a product, you've got a whole support system to back it up. Your web page is amazing. You've got all the real simple categories for people to go to that they can become disciples of their own recovery, and also for therapists to use as well, right? So that we can become better educated by utilizing the Topspin 360 product, but also the information.
Yeah. And that's where, like, talk about disciples, one of, so the Citadel women's volleyball team down at, I believe they're D1, women's volleyball down in the States, NCAA, it's the fourth leading cause of concussion by gender. And back in 2018, the head coach was there. They had 8 concussions with a team of like about 24, 25 players. So as you can imagine, they were quite desperate to help solve this concussion issue, especially when down there, it's essentially 3 strikes and you're out. So if you've had 3 concussions, they will medically retire you from your sport, regardless of what sport it is. So they had one girl who had 2 concussions that season. So she was 1 concussion away. And she was like, from what I understand, their star player that was like kind of her first year on the team. So they're like, Jesus, this House of Cards, one bad hit and we've lost her. And she's like the cornerstone. And so they trained on Topspin 360 in the off season. And in 2019, they went from 8 concussions 2018 down to 0 in 2019. And then they continued training on it. And in 2020, 0 concussions. So the head coach has said he's never been on a team that has had 0 concussions, let alone back-to-back 0 concussion seasons. So like it's incredible. He recently just sent me a video showing me of like one girl who, there's no other way to describe, but got tattooed by a ball that after the spike hit her in the head, it proceeded to bounce all the way up into the rafters and back down. And she was unconcussed. She ended up later on in that play, made a dive and then had to do a headstand to get this dive right by the post, and no concussion after. And no one even realized that she got hit in the head, because it happened so quickly and there's no negative effect to her. She's like, yeah, I tried to get my hands up, couldn't get them up fast enough, and that was right off my noggin. Really? Yeah, couldn't get it.
Yeah, imagine the force for that to happen, and that load and force has to be hit with a reflexive support system. There's no time in there to go, oh, I think I'll contract.
Yeah, I'm going to brace for it. Yeah, she didn't have time to get her hands up, let alone brace her neck for getting that impact.
Yeah, well, that's brilliant. It's brilliant because it completely creates the ability for people to have a better life. Bottom line.
Yeah,
we talk about athletes because it's sort of sexy and they're measurable and tested. They're very easy to test. Mm-hmm. But really, that gap that we have is really about filling that gap with Topspin 360. And I think that as the medical group and all the listeners, we can take a look at this, and we owe it to ourselves to go and do our homework on this and take a look at it and drop a line to you to engage and say, how do we support Topspin, because it is really created from the intestinal fortitude of there being nothing out there, and you're a problem solver. And then to put your PhD on it is to say, I'm going to do this. And then to back it up with the financing and the money and the time and the effort. It's not for the faint-hearted, is it, Theo?
No, and yeah, you're exactly right. Like, and you'll appreciate that. It always feels like, oh, another 2 or 3 years. Oh, another 2 or 3 years. And I've been in this a decade, and you with Coreshorts, same thing, but even longer, right? And it's just, you need such, like, it's really hard to articulate, but it comes down to just an unwavering, just belief and understanding that it's just like, no, okay, is there anything I'm missing here? And each time you kind of go and you poke and prod and you're like, no, like this is rock solid. Like everything is pointing to, and if I don't do it, it's not going to happen. And this needs to get out there. Like the same thing with the Coreshorts, right? Like it's like, no, like this is a tangible problem that we have a solution for, that we've got to get out there, because otherwise there's going to be people going down where they do not need to be going down, and we can enhance and improve them on so many levels. We've got to get this out there.
Yeah. So many of us are problem solvers. We problem solve in the clinic. We problem solve when we're sitting having a beer. And, it's great. And through that problem solving and that encouragement, we can stand there and sort of be, hey, everybody, you can do it too. We want to support the innovators out there, and, innovate through knowledge, and then innovate through passion, and then, innovate to make sure you got a good support system around you, when we're all done, we just want to leave it in a better place too, right? Yeah.
And that, it's, I think it's really important to, they always say kind of ideas are a dime a dozen, right? Like, yeah, there's a lot of good ideas out there, and there's a few great ideas, and you really do need to like focus on the great ideas, and you have to try to like poke holes in your idea.
Yeah, that's right. You got to poke holes in it.
Yeah, and see where does it fall apart? Where do the wheels fall off? And can you put those wheels back on, or should they stay off? Right?
Well, you're exactly right. And it was a great pleasure to run into you last year in February at Indianapolis at the NFL meetings, walking down the hall. And I didn't know you were there, and you didn't know I was there. And we looked at each other and went, and you went, Greg? And I went, yeah. And he goes, Theo. I was, oh my gosh. And so now we're joined at the hip again,
That's right. Yeah.
So here, we're there, we're solving problems. We're pretty, it's fun at the NFL. Everybody's coming over. Oh, we had every team but two with our product. And not only that, we played a big role in even the Super Bowl with a number of players and a lot of thank yous. And it's fun. You're there, and you're the winner of the NFL First and Future Award. And we're just 25 years ago, two physios having a beer, and we're down in the U.S. making a difference, and we're making a difference up here in Canada. We make a difference with everybody, right? And so, this has just been such a great discussion today. I'm so proud of the work you've done. It sounds funny as a colleague to say that, but I am. And you're such a leader of the innovation, backing it up with science. We've got outcomes. And, I'm grateful for you being able to come and share with us what your baby is. And by golly, for all of us, we need to support it. We need to get on the bandwagon. But let's do our homework first. Let's shake it out and see what falls out of it. And then make sure that when we're really happy with it, that we call you and support you and find out how to do that. Because Dr. Theo Versteegh has been our guest today. PhD, physio, amazing, but really the talk's been about his passion and his innovations. And I have absolutely, Theo, no thoughts about the fact that you're going to change the world. And this does, your product does, you do, your education backing does. And, I'm just so happy that you're continuing on with it, that you could share your journey with a lot of the people that get to listen to us.
Well, thanks, Greg. I really appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun, and we'll definitely have to connect again for a few beers once COVID lifts.
Absolutely. So everybody, we're going to wrap up today with a most amazing conversation on the Topspin 360. Thank you, Dr. Versteegh, for joining us today here on Injuries, Innovations, and Insights.